Welcome to Whiskey Gaming, and this is my late review of Star Wars Jedi Knight 2 Jedi Outcast. I play on the PS5, it's also available on the PS4, Xbox One, Xbox Series, PC, and even on the Nintendo Switch. So let's get into the story. You once again play as Kyle Katarn, and he has abandoned the Jedi ways and is no longer a Jedi, but he is still a merc working for the Republic. Unfortunately for him, while on a mission, he runs into a dark Jedi and they kidnap Jan. He, having abandoned the Force, no longer has the power required, so he must go and get the Force again, basically. And I gotta say, I actually like the story. I think it's a good and compelling story, which is important. And I like all the different characters. They weave in some other Star Wars characters throughout. You know, some of the obvious ones like Luke and Jan, and you run into a couple less obvious ones, which I appreciated. Now let's get into the audio, and the music is sufficiently Star Wars. It's not necessarily all the most memorable stuff, but it is still Star Wars. The sound effects, they're good, they're dated. Obviously, the sound quality isn't quite what it once was, but it's all good enough. And the voiceover work is, for the most part, that is good. It's not necessarily stellar in all situations. But let's move on to the gameplay mechanics and whatnot. And the game starts out as a first-person shooter, kind of like it did originally. And it makes sense because you're not wielding a lightsaber, so you don't necessarily need the same camera angle. Until you do. Yeah, once you get your lightsaber back, when you're in lightsaber, third person. When you're shooting, first person. And just like the other games in the series, it is level to level, although a lot of the levels are broken up into like 2 to maybe even 3 sections. But it really does follow the same paths you're used to. Beat all the enemies, you know, click a few switches, beat a few more enemies, continue on to the next part of the objective, and so on down the line. I will say, and maybe it was just me, and maybe I accidentally bumped up the difficulty, but I play most games on medium, and I felt like this game was kicking my ass on medium. Again, I remember messing with the settings, so I may have bumped up the difficulty, but I had to bump it down, which required me to start over, which was a pain in the ass. But then I really started to get more and more into it then, because I was really progressing, and I wanted to progress, but like I said, the game was kicking my ass. Mostly due to the stormtroopers just moving so sporadically, it got very difficult to deal with them. Like, they were unpredictable, they would just do the weirdest shit that made no sense and made them very hard to shoot when you had to shoot them. And you lost health really quickly, so I think I was playing on a higher difficulty than I intended. Which led to me save scumming, which is a point that I will make. You have to manually save. There are not a lot of checkpoints. There are very, very few checkpoints. So if you fuck up, you may have to restart basically the entire level. But overall, I found the gameplay enjoyable enough. It was nothing like mind-shattering. It doesn't necessarily hold up with all the same stuff today, but it is kind of enjoyable, the simplicity of it. Let's move on to the controls, and the controls aren't perfect. I find the movement to be very floaty, which can be really difficult in some of the platforming, as well as if you're trying to shoot from cover, you might accidentally launch yourself out when you didn't mean to. As for the button presses, I found them to be responsive. I didn't find myself not shooting when I was trying to, or swinging my lightsaber, etc. Still don't love the way you manage your force power and items and weapons on the D-pad. Not in love with that. It works well enough and you do get used to it, but it could be better, especially if you need to switch force powers fairly rapidly. And then on to the graphics and visuals, and it's very dated. That should be surprising to absolutely no one. I mean, the original game came out in 2002, so this isn't going to look beautiful. This isn't a remaster. This isn't a remake. This isn't any of those. I was playing basically an up-res version of the OG. That being said, the amount of detail in it is not there, which is kind of a given because they just didn't have the graphical fidelity to put insane amounts of detail into it. But there is enough detail that you feel the Star Wars of it, you feel who the characters are, you know who they are, you can see them. The mouths on all of the characters look really weird in every cutscene. It doesn't matter which one, doesn't matter which character, doesn't matter which cutscene, the mouths look weird. But I think the design is good. The design brings you into the Star Wars universe once again, and I think that's what really matters at the core. Beautiful graphics hinge on a good design. It doesn't matter how pretty something is, if the design itself looks like shit. If a character design is shitty, doesn't matter how pretty you make the character with all the other little details that you can do with greater graphical fidelity. But like any good Star Wars game, you have your variety of blasters, you have your lightsaber, you have your force powers, which they do look a little less interesting than modern ones do. But you also go to your, pretty traditional different Star Wars worlds. You have your metropolitan area, you have some mines, etc. You go to a bunch of different ones. You go to the Sky City, all of that jazz. You're gonna recognize the areas. They all feel sufficiently Star Wars, which is kind of good and bad because we've seen so many similar places across Star Wars over the decades. But overall, I'm not somebody who lives and dies on graphics, so I was quite happy with these. I'm totally down with them. So to get into the wrap up, has this game aged amazingly? No, it has not. Is it still enjoyable to play? Is it a fun thing to go back to if you grew up with a game like this? Yeah, if you played this back in the day, then yeah, coming back to it has a certain value to you. If you're just in love with Star Wars and you don't mind graphics and a little bit of rough gameplay, then you're gonna enjoy this. I'm kind of trying to play a bunch of these games just because why not, and I enjoyed them once upon a time, and sometimes they let you down. But this one really didn't let me down the way I was kind of expecting it to. So I can recommend it. Okay, in the comments down below, why don't you tell me, do you love Kyle Katarn as a Jedi, yay or nay? And as always, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that like button, and if you like what I'm doing in general, share and subscribe. Have a good one.